How's it happening, folks? I got my booster shot this month, and it knocked my lights out for 2 whole days. I had all sorts of bizarre fever nightmares, with the strangest being this all-day one that involved having to stare at Greek gods flexing and competing with one another with bow and arrows. It was really boring and I didn't want to be there, but I also couldn't leave it. I also couldn't eat ramen that day without spitting it out. It was not a good time, but neither will be whatever variant will come next that 2 people in California might get and soon spread it to everyone else. Anyway, I like talking about movies, but I don't like editing, so most of this video will be just stills and shit. That's the compromise I'm offering, no backsies. Anyway, let's get to cinema. Hotel Transylvania Transformania is the fourth and final entry of the Hotel Transrites franchise restaurants. It's about Dracula and the guy who bagged his daughter, switching species, so now Andy Samberg's the monster and Drac is the human. They have to go to a place and get the thing to turn them back. Everyone else joins too eventually. So I've been watching these movies since I rented the first one, and I enjoyed it enough at the time that I saw the second one in theaters. And none of these are high tier cinema. I'm sure plenty of people can agree with me on that take. But they serve their purpose. They're entertaining kid distractors that also introduce classical movie monsters in a very harmless way, which I'd say gives them a certain value. I mainly watch them because of their animation. It's one of the first times I've ever seen CG just completely give up on any kind of realism and go off on exaggerated poses and movements. I love that kind of style. The real credit goes to Genny Tartakovsky for really pushing it to that extent. And he did not return to direct this one, on the basis of working on 5 different projects right now. Although given my general opinion on this, it's probably for the best he jumped ship, even though he still wrote it. Wait, so that counts as 6 projects he worked on at the same time. Jesus, dude, do you sleep? On a related note, Adam Sandler did not return either. I guess because he was busy filming Hubie Halloween or something. Law of equivalent exchange. While I enjoy looking at them in their ADD fast-paced glory, their writing's always been pretty albeit not any more painful than other animated movies of their ilk. If anything, they seem to embrace the fact that they present themselves less like actual movies and more like extended cartoon episodes, which feels appropriate given the director's pedigree, but in turn, never elevating on a level beyond, well, that kept my kids quiet for 90 minutes. I haven't rewatched any of them, apart from some clips here and there, but like I said, I remembered kinda liking the first one for what it was. It had some shockingly dramatic moments in it that makes it feel so out of step with the remainder of the series. You really get a sense of Gendy's Samurai Jack vibes in some of these shots. The second one I thought sucked. It wasn't funny, it felt very plotting, its themes I found kinda questionable. It's about how you should accept others for who they are until they randomly conform to what you want them to be. The third one I rented again, just kind of on a whim. I must have really not been doing anything that day, and I thought it was entertaining. It's the first one Genny actually wrote, so it felt the most like his movie, having some of the best visual designs in all of the films, even if it still has basically no real story and it's just a collection of loose skits. So I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of this one. I found it kind of weird that haha Jonathan was the protagonist, considering he's kind of been the worst character in all of these, but Gendy was writing it again, so I knew I was in for some fun stuff. And man, if these films weren't already out of ideas a few movies ago, they definitely are now. While it didn't annoy me as much as 2, it definitely bored me the most. Well, the actual pacing is really wonky. It starts off very fast. I think in about 10 minutes, Monster F***er turns himself into a f***ing monster, which sets the plot into motion, but right after he and Dracula go on their journey, the film just grinds to a halt for practically the rest of its fairly short runtime. It's the same humor over and over again. Drac is not used to his human body and he gets repeatedly injured through various means, all while Simpberg just moseys around, all happy-go-lucky. If you can't tolerate this character, then I don't think you could tolerate this movie. It's not even all that interesting a journey. Most of it is set in this forest and there's a cave and that's about it. Like the third movie you could argue doesn't have much of a plot either, but at least you go to places, like they're in a casino at one point and then they're underwater and then there's a beach and then there's some underground ruins, and this just comes off as very uninspired by comparison. I like it whenever we cut back to Drac's waifu daughter and actual waifu, as they're both fun characters who are doing different things, while Drac's friends are human, and some of them are very controversially not hot. This was a subculture that's new to me. And while I'd argue this was the least visually inspired out of all of them, there are still some fun sequences here, like when the robotic-bodied Van Helsing moves around his cluttered lab in little nooks and crannies that he could shape through perfectly. But stuff like that is pretty far and few between. You know how bored I am when I start to notice continuity mistakes in goddamn Hotel Transylvania. Like in the scene where Drac freezes everyone but Mavis, as vampires can't freeze other vampires. I could have sworn he froze her on a couple occasions. Likewise, there's a part where he uses vampire hypnotism on his grandson, which works, but like, isn't he a vampire as well? Shouldn't that not work? I like how the grandson has nothing to do in any of these movies after the second one. I also like how in the first movie, Mavis's big motivation is to leave the hotel and explore the world, and every subsequent film afterwards has her stay firmly in the hotel. Whatever character goal or matter of importance anyone has doesn't matter, cause we're hitting the beach now. Are we getting our species switched? Whoa-hoy! I don't know, maybe I would have thought differently had I seen this in a movie theater, which is the only way to see a Hotel Transylvania.
The only place to experience Transformania is in a movie theater, October 1st.
I guess being the Amazon Movie of the Week is a far more fitting fate for it. It's a product that I'm gonna forget about by the time I'm done with this review. While not the most painful animated film series in the world, I'm really happy this is the confirmed final one, especially for Sony Animation's sake. In the past few years, they've taken such a radically different approach with their work and their reputation that it feels like they've outgrown making these. I'm happy to see them move on and let Gendy do other things now.
Help me.
They've had a good run, but just like Haha Jonathan eventually will, they'll have to struggle with their mortality and know that they will die while fetish art of their wife will live on forever.
Yeah, goth time all the time. Yeah. Off this cliff I go. Yeah.
The House is about a couple who learn that their town's scholarship program isn't funding their daughter's college tuition, so in order to make back their money, they build an illegal casino and hijinks ensue. I have not seen the 2017 comedy The House, but I'm sure it is a quality cinematic achievement that has been released in over 3,000 theaters and made all sorts of money. For now though, I'm talking about some Netflix cartoon crap. The House is a stop-motion animated anthology of 3 shorts set inside the titular house, but the denizens range from humans to rats to cats, and each story has something weird going on with each of them. I do love me a good anthology, as well as some good stop-motion. The House has some great stop-motion, and as an anthology, it's alright. As the 3 segments were each made by a different filmmaker, there isn't much of a connective tissue to each of these films as far as thematics go. You could point some out, such as feeling alienated by your own family making decisions out of your control, or the stress of renovating a place that is currently in shambles, or also feeling like you never really knew the people you live with despite how long you've been with them. In terms of genre, I'd say it's horror, as that's at least the tone that the marketing is trying to push, but for the most part, they're a little bit goofier than that. The most horror-centric of the 3 is the first one with the family. That had the creepiest atmosphere and the tiniest faces, and it might actually be my favorite of the 3. The real estate rat agent is also very fun. It reminded me of one of Wes Anderson's animations, at least in terms of the character design. I spent the whole short thinking that this rat guy was voiced by Stephen Merchant, because he kinda sounded like him.
I'll be downstairs if you need anything at all.
I then found out afterwards he's actually played by Jarvis Cocker, who actually was in the Wes Anderson movie, where he wrote a bad song.
Just making it up as I went along, really.
That's just weak songwriting. You wrote a bad song, Petey.
The one with the cats was probably the least interesting to me, which is a shame because it stars cats. It just wasn't as interesting or creative as the others. In a way, this film kinda reminds me of this other anthology movie called Memories, which had 2 really good segments and one very meh one. Only I think I kinda like that one more than this. Though this is still good and worth your time. I strongly encourage different types of adult animations that don't fall into comedy, and I want more films like this to be made. So if you're looking for the best cockroach dance number since Joe's Apartment, you're in for a good time. Scream. Which, really? What a boring goddamn name. You couldn't call it Scream 5? Or better yet, Scrifivum? The last one you did was called Scriforum. You oughta just Too Fast, Too Furious that shit, you know? Anyway, Scrifivum is about some new ghost mask killers making a splash on some new teens, and these two estranged sisters need to figure out how to stop them with the help of all the OG Scream peeps. I'm really surprised how in the universe of these movies the ghost masks are like never recalled or anything. They seem to be the mask equivalent of the Confederate flag, just their iconography alone is tied into so many murders. I guess they're like alcohol, they probably should be illegal, but they've been around too long to get rid of. Anyway, the Scream series was never one I had an innate familiarity with. I saw the first one a long time ago and it didn't leave much of an impression on me, but because of this new one coming out and that I do like some of Wes Craven's stuff, I decided to check out the prior quadrilogy, and I think as a whole, Scream is fine. I like the first one a little more on this rewatching, and the movies do kinda have a charmingly late 90s dimension horror feel to them. But I guess why I'm not huge into them is that I think they're just a little too cute for their own good. They lean a bit too heavily on the, oh, I've seen this horror movie before, the killer always strikes when the victim is alone. Yeah, if I were in a movie, I would have been played by Matthew Perry, or David Schwimmer, or any other friend who's not the one in this movie. Really? We're doing another sequel? They should have quit while they're ahead, just like in Nightmare on Elm Street. You know what happened in Nightmare on Elm Street, folks, 'cause I directed it. I could give them partial leeway, as they must have been pretty refreshing at the time for slashers to be this meta or in on the joke. I personally prefer meta humor to be more insinuated than outright spelled out for you, but whatever, as long as they're still entertaining, that's all that really matters. Out of all the Screams, the only one I kinda outright dislike is the third. I found the payoff of it unsatisfying and its stories the most unengaging, but every other film was consistently pretty okay. I think a big part of it is that I do like the lead characters and how they play off one another, so it was certainly a move to have the film focus mainly on new characters, but at the same time fitting given that this is supposed to be a soft reboot, or as this movie repeatedly calls it, a requel. Glad to see the subtlety never decreased over the decades. With the passing of Wes Craven, the new directors on this were the duo behind Ready or Not, a horror comedy movie that you could say has some slight meta undertones, making them a good fit to helm something like this. I wouldn't say they, nor the new screenwriter, really breathed new life into the series, but more adopted the child and left the kid to his own devices with partial supervision. I mean, there's only so much you could do with Scream, so sticking to its basics was kind of a no-brainer and fits the whole theme of requels. Seriously, just call it soft reboot. The new cast did okay. I thought the two sisters were both pretty good, even if they aren't the most compellingly written. And as for the returning actors, they all felt a little off to me. Especially Courtney Cox, who looks like she didn't even want to be here. I'm sure she wanted to. This had a fairly low budget. I doubt money was the main motivation for getting these people back, but a strange trend I notice in these long-term low-budget sequels is how bored a lot of the returning actors seem to be. So acting's mostly fine. Writing is more or less what you expect out of a Scream, although I find it better than 3. But what about that ghost face? Well, that's kind of where my bigger issues with the film lie. While there's nothing wrong with the kills themselves, they were pretty satisfyingly gory, arguably more so than the original. I was able to fairly accurately predict who the murderers were in this, at least one of them more so than the other. I mean, right from the beginning, there was kind of an obvious clue who it's gonna be. I know it may not be the biggest deal, but part of the appeal of this franchise, as I see it, is that it's partially a mystery as to who could be the killers, because everyone has an agenda, and I felt every other film did a decent enough job at keeping me guessing. And as much as I like the parts where the Mojo Jojo voiced ghoul man jumps out and attacks people, there's this very annoying thing it does, that I'm pretty sure the others did as well, but not to this distracting of an extent, is whenever someone is alone and doing something, and they open a door or a fridge, and the camera stays with them for longer than a second, and it gets you wondering, oh shit, is the killer hiding behind that door? Don't close it. And then they close it, but it turns out there's nothing behind it after all, and it's all like, gotcha, you thought we were gonna scare you now, did ya? There was what felt like a good 5-minute chunk in the middle where an entire scene was nothing but that, and it got really monotonous. I know you think you're smarter than me, movie. You don't need to remind me again, and again, and again. So Scream 2022, otherwise what should be known as Scrifivum, was another Scream movie. I may have been a bit frustrated by it at times, but it did keep me entertained, which is really what should matter. It could have been worse than what it was, but also maybe better. For where it stands, it is definitely an installment of this horror series I've never particularly loved but never really hated either. Bunch of hot teenagers talking about how well they know slashers but still getting injured or killed anyway. Your mind should probably be made up on whether to see this or not, cause otherwise I got one question for you. What's your favorite horror movie? Mine's Evil Dead 2. It's pretty great. Belle is the new film from acclaimed director Mamoru Hosoda about a shy girl who goes onto a massive social media world where she is a famous idol who crosses paths with a vigilante whom she grows quite close to. In a way, it is a spiritual successor to an earlier Hosoda film, Summer Wars, in that both are set in a large virtual world filled with various avatars and settings, while this film also serves as a retelling of the Beauty and the Beast story, especially given the protagonists' names are literally Belle and the Beast. Now, Hosoda's filmography is kind of interesting to me, in that he's been consistently making movies that are very acclaimed, that have given him lots of international attention in award shows and whatnot. And the thing is, every time I see a new film from him, I really want to love it. I really want to join in on the majority and consider his work a masterpiece. But there's always just something about it, something holding it back from me, considering it great. I felt this way about Wolf Children, I felt it during Mirai, and I felt it during this. Certainly not for lack of effort on his part, as his films do tackle very personal but universal topics regarding family, identity, self-confidence, and the like. For whatever I say about it, I could see a movie like this potentially helping someone somehow, the same way his others might, and in that retrospect, I think that's great. What I wish for, however, was for a film that was a little tighter, a little better written, cause I feel this is a script that was only a few more drafts away from being pretty good. On one hand, you have the story set in the real world, where the main girl who's still shaken over the loss of her mother and is very socially awkward with people, has a passion and talent for singing, but just can't. And on the other hand, you've got the virtual world where she plays an idol who's everything she isn't and can give her an opportunity to sing and let her voice be heard. Now, the real world story isn't anything too inspired. It's got a lot of the same slice of life plot threads we've seen before, like, oh no, does my crush like me? But I didn't mind it either. I liked all the main characters, and I was at least interested in seeing their stories play out. It was a commonplace but charming enough watch on its own. But it's when we get to the virtual world, the singer idol stuff, which I was the most interested in going to see, where it takes a turn for the messy. The first big issue I had was that I really never understood how this world works. It's a giant place that chooses an avatar based on your personality, and you get to navigate in anonymity. Anonymity. That. Alright, so it seems like you connect to it on your own device, but also wear these earbud things, at least some of the time, if I'm remembering correctly. And I guess you kinda mosey along until people take notice of you. That's what the main character does until she experiences a sudden rise of fame that happens pretty quick, as in the span of 5 minutes in movie time, she goes from having basically no followers to tens of millions. And then her friend in real life becomes her agent or something. I didn't even know her friend knew about it until the scene that shows her working with her. And then the titular Belle becomes kind of this massive force for singing songs about how we all feel a little lonely on the inside or something. The songs themselves didn't do much for me personally, but I will give the movie credit for establishing that not everyone likes her in-universe, and that critics and trolls do exist. That's a surprisingly realistic touch. I mean, I'll give it that. So I'm guessing this place operates like a YouTube Twitter zone of whoever's popular will get all the attention without really knowing who they are. But then there are these virtual furry police officers, which, accurate, who are led by a Gaston-type villain who's chasing the Beast, who at one point crashes one of Belle's concerts somehow, where the Gaston leader threatens to expose his identity to the world, that he has the power to do so? How? Is it legal to just dox people in this place? Kinda ruins the whole appeal of living under a different identity, don't you think? I mean, I'd consider that false advertising. I'm also never sure what the appeal of this place really is beyond that. You never really see any other areas apart from the giant hub worlds, and like the Beast Castle is its own thing. You have to access through various lands just to get in. Doesn't seem that interesting to be on, though I may not be the best judge of that. The only virtual world I've really devoted time to is in Pop Tropica. This is about as good a time as any to start comparing it to Hosada's earlier film Summer Wars, which is both my favorite of his and kind of a stronger version of this film in a lot of ways. The virtual world in that they really take the time to explain, and you not only get a feeling of how it works, but also why people like to be on it. Even beyond that, I found the whole story of the extended family banding together and the relationship of the two leads far more captivating in that than anything in this. I never really cared about the relationship between this Belle and the Beast, which is a bit of an issue considering what the story is. He's like some underground fighter avatar who seems troubled, and so she sings to him, and their relationship grows. Once we do learn about the Beast's actual identity, it does start to get a little more interesting. There are some personal stakes that I felt the movie was missing by that point. But that isn't until the third act, after an otherwise fairly aimless 2/3. If there's one thing that's undeniable though, the movie is visually gorgeous. And you have the expansive virtual world which is entirely rendered in some very well executed cel-shaded CG. I heard something about how this was kind of an international co-production, like Belle herself was designed by a Disney artist, and there are some backgrounds that are done by the famous Irish studio Cartoon Saloon. It gives off some nice visual diversity in several scenes. There were a few shots I noticed that looked to be lifted from the original Disney adaptation of Beauty and the Beast, which is certainly a bold choice. I bet this will probably look breathtaking on IMAX, although as it is, it looked great on the big screen. I'm really happy that G-Kids have been going for more wide releases lately. I feel like they could be kind of an A24 for animation enthusiasts. Regardless, Belle is a pretty but very imperfect adaptation of a tale as old as time for the modern generation that feels like it's several different stories and ideas rolled into one, with some of them working better than others. If you're already on board to see this, go ahead and do so. There's enough interesting stuff here to warrant a watching. You know, I wonder if the metaverse will have their own doxing gun. Wouldn't put it past them to try. Wow, am I really dating this video now?